We're back and ready to start on the second half of our symposium. And the chair for this session, while we're mostly in the Western Hemisphere now, with a little sop to the old world, we have coming to us from the UK to chair this session, IGS trustee, Dom Heffer. It's all yours, Dom.
Thank you, Lance, and thanks everyone so far. It's been really interesting. Been able to catch 6:30 p.m. over here, and with Lance's just allusion to the being in the West, and to Susan, I had to pour myself a glass of wine. So cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
So really excited to be chairing this section. This session, semantic reactions. So the rules are the same. So 15 minutes for each speaker, 4 speakers, and then some time to gather our own semantic reactions. Remember, no two will be the same. Towards the end, hopefully we'll have 15 minutes or so at the end. So without further ado, we'd like to begin with a paper entitled Mapping the Territory, Active Listening and Active Feedback Processes in Meaning Making. And it's going to be delivered by Donna the Grushina at Dartmouth College, USA. So over to you, Donna.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or morning or evening. It's great to be here, and thank you, everyone, for being here. So my virtual background is my home institution, Dartmouth College, which is located in Hanover, New Hampshire, US. And I would like to make this presentation a little bit interactive and talk about our combined listening. And to start, I'd actually love to find out where some of you are listening from. So if you could put in the chat whatever your response to that question might be, I think it would be a really great start. So where are you listening from? And a quick entry in the chat for us to have a shared understanding. We have Mexico City, New Jersey, Berlin, Ohio, the Bronx, Utah, Kingston, New York, Poland, Winooski, Vermont, I mispronounced that most likely, Argentina, Ukraine, Kyiv, Croatia, New Jersey, Southern France, Seattle, WA, meaning Washington. I spent some time in Perth, WA, which stood for Western Australia. West Coast America, Missouri, USA, West Virginia, Ho Chunk Land in Wisconsin. Hello? So what's really marvelous about this wide variety of areas that we see is also observing how people reference the places that we're from and how we orient to the places we're from based on the frame of reference that we inhabit. So, for example, Poland is obviously the name of a country that someone chooses to put for an international audience where there is such differentiation in terms of the countries where people are from. If we were all locally based, for example, northeast of the United States, then perhaps the identifier of the United States would not be as relevant, and we would be more orienting toward the more specific geographical areas. So it's interesting how the same question kind of evokes slightly different frames of reference in response. And I think seeing this fantastic, fascinating, diverse list of locations also is so great to consider in light of the fact that we are currently inhabiting the same space. And I will engage with you in a few other ways as we go along, but I would like to share with you PowerPoint for a little bit. So I wanted to build in some opportunities for us to talk about listening and for us to think about how we have listened so far in this symposium, especially since this is perfectly timed of being about halfway through. So everyone has had an opportunity to listen or not so far. And I wanted to point out a few things about communication broadly. So my role is currently, I'm a senior lecturer in speech at Dartmouth College. My background is in communication science. I spent some time in New Jersey when I went to Rutgers University, which is School of Communication and Information. And so some kind of foundational ideas about communication that are important and have manifested in everyone's presentation. So communication is dialogic. So we're always communicating, and we are communicating more richly in environments when we have more visual cues. So face-to-face communication is supposed to be the most rich, according to media richness theory, for example. So we have cues about what people look like, what expressions people have, what nonverbal reactions we might be witnessing. This type of communication we have now is quite interesting because we have some visual cues from others in the audience. We can choose to attune to those cues or not, but yet we inhabit really these different points throughout the world, and each of our listening is currently impacted by lots of other inputs that we might experience in our specific contexts. So for example, what's happening next door, what's happening outside, what's happening in your home, with your friends, with your family, in your communities, in your country. So we bring these quite incredibly diverse lenses to the way that we perceive and orient to and hear anything that is said. And we can have some means of contributing how we hear something through, for example, questions when we have an opportunity to do so, or through comments. But also in this type of interaction, we often don't have, as presenters, we have very limited means of perceiving how and whether we're being heard. And that is similar to this context, but also is something that similarly happens in other interactional contexts. So when we're speaking to someone interpersonally in a relationship, in personal communication setting, or academic or professional, we might be curious about what the person is thinking in response to what we say. And we might ask them about that. And then the person's response will be impacted by how and what they wish to reveal. Now, a common communicative response that we encounter is silence. And silence is communicative. And what's interesting in face-to-face public speaking situations is that we often think of that experience as being more monologic rather than dialogic, because like right now, I'm the only one speaking, and you are gracious enough to offer me your attention, or perhaps some of it, or perhaps none of it. And I have very limited means of perceiving what is happening. But nonetheless, our communication is dialogic, because in response to something that you might be seeing, something else that might be going on, your attention and your listening is impacted. There are a few great ideas about listening and attention that have stayed with me and I think are worthwhile to consider for a moment. So one is the statement of attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Another is the stake by Carl Menninger, who was an American psychiatrist. He said that listening is a magnetic and strange thing, a creative force. The friends who listen to us are the ones we move toward. When we're listened to, it creates us, makes us unfold and expand. So I put in a link in the chat to a form that I would just like for you to take a couple of minutes to engage with. This form is anonymous as I could possibly make it, so no emails are being collected for your responses. I believe you might need to have a Gmail account to just open it. But again, no emails are being collected. I would just like for you to reflect on these questions and to actually answer them in the form and submit them right now as I'm speaking. I'm about 9.5 minutes in, so I'd like to give you a couple minutes to respond. So the 3 questions: what one adjective describes your experience at the symposium so far? What, if any, barriers to active listening have you experienced? And finally, what stands out as most impactful for you from the symposium so far? Please note only the first question is required. If you don't feel like completing answers to each one, just put in a word and click submit at the end. But I'll give you a couple of minutes to provide some responses, and then I will share them with you. So here are the results so far. For one adjective. So they're columns of data. Amazing, all caps. informative, rapt, source-rich, engaged, stimulating, stillness, engaging, inspiring, intrigued, interesting, harried, semi-engaged, interesting, quixotic, timely. And what are some barriers to active listening? Language and topics, Zoom formats, own hearing loss. The above, source-rich. None, spouse took the dog away for the day. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but also grateful for your undivided attention. Environmental distractions, meaning college undergrads. Have flu cold, so not processing fast enough, lack of attention. Need to pause to get substance, other than just intellectual stimulation. Accent had to be in two places at the same time. In fact, I'm working on other stuff at the same time. Sleepy. Distractions, family in town. Reflections, international ideas. Okay. So thank you very much for sharing that. So I think this illustration shows how engagement and listening are really difficult and also so important, but listening is impacted by so many different factors, some of which are within and many outside of our control. And I think the fact that there are all these influences that all of us are experiencing as we're listening also impacts how much we're able to hear and address. So I'm out of time, and I will stop here. Thank you so much for your listening and attention.
Thanks very much, Jana. And if attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity, hopefully, I'm sure there's a lot of it in this meeting today. Really interesting to see the session go meta as well and get a cross section of how everyone's kind of experiencing it.
I will send you. I'll put a link to this Excel doc if you'd like to have a look.
Lovely.
That'd be great. Later.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll be moving on to the next speaker, who is R. Aaron Ball, who's an independent scholar from Canada. And R. Aaron is going to be delivering a paper called Visualizing Complexity, Unifying Symbols Through Language Designed for Systems Theory. So over to you, Aaron.
Dom?
Thank you, Dom.
Windows set up so I can see properly. Great. Yeah, so it's less of a paper and more of a project that I've been working on for the past few years. It's a constructed language approach to looking at systems theory. Now I don't see any faces, and I want to be able to be involved with you somehow. Can I put you? I'm a relative newcomer to Korbinski and General Semantics. I only discovered the Institute a year or so ago and attended Milton Dawes' recent presentation, which was quite enjoyable. And this will be the first time that this project is shared to the public. So I'm a little bit nervous. I'll try not to speak too quickly, but I do have a lot of material here that I'd love to share with you. So, okay. The medium is part of the message. I've shown you cuneiform here because it's a common example of how the writing instrument has affected the language presentation. The glyphs of the cuneiform are triangular because of the corners of the reeds that they're using. It makes that characteristic triangle shape. This is an example of it written in 2 dimension. However, most of our written languages are really in 1 dimension, along time, along the paper, left to right, right to left. You may have seen the science fiction movie, Arrival. It's wonderful. I recommend it. And it makes the... can you hear me okay? Yeah. It makes the hypothesis that our language use will deepen our understanding of reality. And perhaps many of you have had this experience through logic, semiotics, maths, a level of realization that somehow you have more understanding of how to think and how to process and manipulate things. The question of how can we extend the idea of language to think better has been something asked ages and ages. I'll refer to Leibniz in this. He did calculus and characteristica universalis, an attempt at universal language, but this is a question ongoing in philosophy, semantics, and computer science. I didn't start my timer. Thank you. So if we can extend the premise that a language is not just the body of vocabulary or the set of grammatical rules, then every language is an old-growth forest of the mind. Wade Davis is an anthropologist with a lot of love for linguistics and has really shaped how I see the trying to keep a diversity and old growth being like history and culture and layers of interactions of systems. So what would a language like that look like? Something more complicated, something more simple, something more visually graspable, or just obscure. So I think we all know how this goes. Overflow of this talk will just be through this timeline, and I'll try to keep it brief. Who am I? You're welcome to skim my bio there, but since we're in the digital age, I also welcome you to take a screenshot and digest any large amounts of text later, because I won't have time to read it all out. I do want to draw your attention to the fact that I'm an ecologist. That's my background, statistical and mathematical modeling of landscape ecology, satellites, neural classificators, stuff like that. And perhaps relevant to your interests, I'm one of the few dozen speakers of Emojilang. It was the first symbolic language built out of emoji by a bunch of linguistics students out of Japan in 2016, 17 onwards. So all the emoji you see in the presentation will have their own meaning. How I ended up in this stream predicament that led to this project was studying in undergrad and wanting to procrastinate and pulling titles of books off the shelf, two of which drastically changed my life. The left Godel Escherbach on computability and understanding of language, and quite engaging read. And the right-hand side is H.T. Odom Emergy. He was an electrical engineer who worked with fisheries and then sort of realized everything is like circuit diagrams and stores, and was one of the earlier thinkers in systems theory and the math of how to model those things. Okay. So what's the point of having a systems theory language now? There you go. Lots of AI in the earlier session came up. I think that this is one of its bigger advantages, is we can get some sort of symbolic thing to reveal what's going on underlying in the AIs, which are more of a black box already. There's already been some GPT, large language model-based mind map extraction, summarization. Model-based system engineering also wants to use this sort of intuitive extraction for knowledge representation. The idea is maybe to build data sets in the future based upon these rule sets. And then there's the other side of the AI, which wasn't just like compression of language and the inherent structure that we've already used to think about it, but looking at that in a formalized mathematical definition. So rather than coming at it from the data side, like coming from it a theoretical, like symbolic representation of that. Yeah, and then there's some like meta-crisis needs for this in the world, and ways that it can be used to communicate across levels of stakeholders. So my official goal was to try to harmonize the things that were out there in order to make it a little bit more intuitive to build towards a minimal semantic meta language. The bits at the very bottom line there are the types of things that I looked at and found necessary to include systems biology graphical notation, unified modeling language, which is used a lot in business and flowcharts, has a lot of rules there, logic, math, category theory, computer science, engineering, and developmental psychology. I was also influenced by shorthands and Bliss symbolics, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with Charles Bliss and this like essence of representing things in primes that was then used for nonverbal children. And also you could compare it to ASL in a bit. So looking at all of these, and then this is launch. So there we go. What can you do with it? Flowcharts, really this sort of standardized visualization of complex systems. I've done a large survey of what flowcharts and infographics and all of these things are across research domains, and there isn't really like a common language for these things. Also, we can get into pattern languages of repeated patterns. Someone mentioned that there was like architectural models and things like that earlier, this sort of formalization of a model, directed graphs being the mathematical way of approaching those things. And I tried to keep it with this sort of pro-social utopian idealism of like having our words and our control and our understanding and like revealing the thing. One of the things Charles Bliss had really hoped for was a disambiguation of language to make sure that there wasn't like contorted propaganda thinking. And I think that this like clarity and explicitness makes us question the meanings and semantics that we're using, and making that more explicit by this primes approach. So my goal was to make a minimal, simple set of semantic primes. Principle number one was to disambiguate those things that already exist. So out of the stuff that people are using, what are the things in conflict and how can I resolve those? So the principles which I built that disambiguation on it was the characteristic universalis from Leibniz as this sort of universal language. How can that be appealed? And then the existing logical constructed language approach. One's more formal and logic, like Lodgeband. Tokipona was an effort in simplicity with a specific like happy take on it. And then Ithkuil was like, how can it be like super precise and detailed, but it's quite complicated as a result. And then this list is in the rough order of the priority that things took on. Systems modeling language, of course, is some of these are code, some of these are visuals. The actual things that I'm presenting today are really like a visual layer and aren't trying to replace any of these things, but allow sort of like a intercommunication of those things. Another interesting thing to call your attention to is Sutton's sign writing. An artist had developed a thing for how to write modern dance and the movements of bodies on measures of music, and then eventually ended up doing the same thing for sign language. And looking at some other conlang projects, I saw that there was a lot of like reinventing the wheel, and then Wolfram also has this sort of scientific language, but it's more at the programming level, and it's much too complicated for any like non-modeler to learn, which makes it less accessible. So it needs to be small and disambiguated. And then what can be immutable, but still recognize that language is going to evolve. So the intercommunication of what's already there, like really trying to get it interoperable by minimizing the conflicts and making it accessible. What I'm presenting here today is just the two last points there, the semantic primes, which are like the symbolic, like a prime number, you know, you can't reduce it any further. And then flowcharts, so disambiguation of what's already there and how to get these to talk to each other. And then as you go along, I'm going to start showing some things here instead of text. How many of these just like already seem comprehensible to you? I'd wager that they're like the distance to adoption isn't so bad. This is what it looked like in 2018. On the left-hand side, you can see some of the UML and the systems biology notations. You can get cardinality in there, some electrical engineering at the bottom. And then the symbolic primes are in the blue. And a lot of these look like math, but as things went on, I was able to figure out what math was covering and how the different domains of math were like speaking about things consistently, and then add on top of those symbolic primes from existing language projects, or just the like documentation of what is purported to be the primes, which is about 200. What does it look like in practice? Pretty simple downstream flow here. If the entity of A and the entity of B are happening, then you get the C as a return, and it's a function. If there's only one thing that I'd really like you to take home from this, is that a pattern that kind of emerged naturally is this idea of concept versus process in flowcharts, in the systems of biology. Like, is it a thing, or is it doing something? And there was some conflict about which formats, what shapes got things. So I had to make a choice here. But it's also reflected in the primes and anywhere else I could keep this consistent, this roundness versus square corners. Okay, well, what about rounded rectangles? Well, that's basically both. It's a conceptualization of a process. So here we have a summary of a psychology paper that's talking about the brain networks. And the salience network controls our attention between the central executive network and the default mode network. So the circles there on the right-hand side are the actual like experiential data sense inputs. And then those are going to run through processes that are kind of mapped, but I mean, it's neural networks, right? It's fuzzy. Those pass on in a directed graph of control flow. And then it gets to the salience network where it has to make a choice. With that process, it's actually a function that chooses one or the other. And this is how our brain works. It can do one attention or the other. But there's a lot more shapes. A bunch of these come from UML and a bunch of these come from the systems biology again. One of the things I ended up having to include was perspectives and conversations. And these are like contexts of how to frame individual pieces. And you can do all of the labeling with the UML as it exists. It is compatible to visually. Not a lot of people are familiar with the systems biology, so here's just a summary of what that looks like. I didn't take everything from here, but like quite a bit managed to stay. One of the most important things turned out to be the arrows. While I was relearning some maths, 3 professors would use the same type of arrow, just the one with the like pointy arrowhead that's detached, about 5 different ways over the top of them. So it was clear that to actually build some sort of relationship between shapes, we were going to need lines, and something about that needed to be standardized. So between logic and control systems flow and the UML diagrams, as well as like the actual, chemical and DNA modeling that the systems biology was doing, I was able to come up with this disambiguation, and I welcome you to go through it. On the left-hand side is more like the technical specs of what it is. If there's only one thing you learn from this is use that as implies. So it can be something that's general, or like in a logical sense, it still retains its implies, but you can go more strict with material implication with the double arrow. So what does this actually look like when you're trying to map something out? Here's an example of the Toulmin model for argumentation that I learned in communications class, taken in my system with the relevant things. So if you know UML, it's going to be pretty relatable, except the arrows are going to be a little bit more specific and sort of tell you how this thing works. Here's another example for a definition of process from actual like systems modeling type of thing. And this is a model-based systems engineering types of stuff that are used by NASA to actually build like control specs. On the left-hand side, you can see like a series of decisions. To do this type of stuff, if you'd like to map, I would highly recommend this editor is the best one out there. It's free, it's really deep, it's capable. That QR code there takes them to a recent video that's like a week and a half, 2 weeks old, from them, how they just introduced a new way to like execute functions on the tops of the existing graphs. So you can do this for formatting or computation. It's really quite nice. And without further ado, here they are. Here is the 194 primes that include math and various things. The arrows on the top, then you have your like first person, second person pronouns, logic, sets, arithmetics, specifics of the questions, a whole bunch of assignments, inequalities, and predicate calculators and logics. And then the long blue one down there is actually like distances. And then followed the orange bit after that is time. I'll come back to this at the end here. So there was a bunch of like challenges along the way. I needed to get it under 200. I needed to resolve the duplicates and so on and so forth. Some of the problems like and in common language, we use and so many different ways, but like explicitly in math, it's going to mean a bunch of different things. So I had to get quite specific on that. In terms of grammar, they behave like semantic trees. You can structure things like the paragraph example at the early slide, just having them in sets. You can change your subject verb order, subject verb order, pardon me, to allow it to function with different languages. It can write from right to left, like all of the symbols are reflectable. This is sort of the details. Yeah, so particles also in common language isn't as precise. Like the languages primes were one, two, few, many sort of things, and that's not very explicit. So I tried to make it a little bit more mathematical, whereas there's a unique sum as exists maybe up to like 20%, but is more one or more, which is just a logical state. Many being like a good proportion of them, you could expect that average of your distribution. Most is like 80% or something. These are rough, but more like looking at it as a distribution that we have like more details about. And then inverting these and having them, relate to each other and with more specificity was a challenge too. Colons and semicolons across all programming languages are a big mess, so I tried to clean it up and make it as simple as I could here. There's other challenges, like how do I incorporate good and bad? Isn't that a moralistic problem to even think that those terms can be applied? Like what is that objectively? How do I point to that? That's one of the common tests of primes. Things that were better left complicated to have. I don't want to define that specifically because it's another word like and, where it's so many different things that can be related. Then you have the types of infinities, there's mathematical symbols that have a specific meaning that I don't need to go into. And there's a bunch of things that it's compatible with, like for code translation, it's been used in language translations. Wolfram language, again, is getting addressed. This is kind of a joke slide about metaprogramming, but it, on the right-hand side, reinforcing the benefits of it. What can you do with it? Like, it basically makes mental models into something more explicit as a relationship that you can work on. So if you define it with implies early on, then you can get it more specific, which can allow for all of these outcomes. In summary, 250, less than that. It's good for brainstorming, whiteboards, paper, collaboration, interdisciplinary as well as multi-level, and can help you with next level infographics. Again, concept equals circle, process is a rectangle. If you're mappers, I do recommend that software. Common like cognitive bias is the sum is everything. Like when you see that something exists as a sum, then you like conflate it to all. This is a bias that I've seen all over the time. And having actual explicit definitions for that in our language might allow us to overcome that just by like reflecting on that as it goes. And then, yeah, if you want to chat at me, the percentage you think you understood and would love to hear you. I'm still developing this thing and want to get it out there, applied and collaborative. So I will just leave that for a second for you to explore. Thank you.
Thank you, R.A. That was really interesting. What amazes me with these kind of projects is the beauty of the languages, as well as reminiscent of I was thinking of Georgi Lagotti's graphic notations as well. I was looking at some of these symbols. So thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
Okay, so moving on to our third presenter of this session, Donna Flayhan from State University of New York at New Paltz. And Donna is going to be presenting Reflections, Intentions and Spirit Interventions, a Poetic Path in Public Health. Lovely alliteration there. Donna, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to screen share now. So let's see. Screen share. It should be here. Okay. It's not sharing yet?
That's sharing.
It is sharing now. Okay. And you can obviously hear me. Oops, I went to the next slide, but that's okay. Let me go back one. Thank you for inviting me. And this is a reflection on the work that I've been doing in public health. Really, since my undergraduate days at the University of New Hampshire, first accidentally, and then at the University of Iowa intentionally, and then over the years in toxins in public health, carbon monoxide awareness, helping veterans from the first Gulf War, 90-91, get the answers, benefits, and treatments that they deserve, and then founding, directing, and working on the Lower Manhattan Public Health Project to help the rescue, recovery, cleanup workers and residents of Lower Manhattan get the answers, benefits, and treatments that they deserve. So this is the title, Reflections, Intentions, and Spirit Interventions. It's really only in reflecting back to my undergraduate days, right up to last spring, 2023. I'll be ending with that slide. Just some things that have happened. How did I end up in media studies, media ecology, and public health? So here we go. So in the 1986 to 1990, I was an undergraduate at the University of New Hampshire. I was fortunate to have Joshua Meyerowitz as an undergraduate professor. He had no graduate students. I loved media ecology immediately, understood that perspective very quickly. And so I was, as an undergraduate doing graduate level work with Professor Meyerowitz. And I was also doing straight content studies as well. So from 86 to, I'd say 88, by the time I was a sophomore, I was completely interested in the content of what I was learning. But at first, what was my intention when I wrote a critical analysis of journalism course paper, analyzing the content of the tobacco ads and the warning labels, and to see if what was happening as far as the tobacco industry had been barred from advertising on television. They could only advertise in magazines. And so I wrote a paper. My intention was to earn an A+. I wanted to have a 4.0. That was my goal. And in order to earn a 4.0 at the University of New Hampshire at that time, you had to learn a lot of content. And in that learning of the content, I became a very invigorated and interested scholar in a lot of different areas, and mostly media ecology and public health. At first, this paper, what I just showed, I had to use the microfilm. Those of you who use microfilm in libraries, I get motion sickness. It was a lot of research on the content of the placement of warning labels in magazines. And what I found was that the tobacco industry was strategically putting the pregnant women may result in fetal injury warnings in what were particularly targeted as men's magazines. Cigarette smoke contains carbon monoxide was in a lot of the women's magazines. People don't necessarily know what that means. So I was just showing that the tobacco industry was playing by the law, but manipulating the law in order to reduce the impact of the warnings on the audience members. My next intention with that paper was, in my sophomore year, it was actually in that critical analysis of journalism class. Meyerowitz wrote on my paper, wow, this is brilliant. Have you ever thought of getting a PhD? And I have to honestly say, I did not know what PhD stood for. I had to go to the library because I wasn't going to ask. And I realized that he was referring to a doctorate of philosophy, and that's what all my professors seem to have. So I decided, sure, I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, but I was like, you know what, this sounds great. The professor, life, and also the life of the mind. And so the next intention with my tobacco warning paper that earned the A+ was, as I was applying to graduate schools, I gave that as one of my writing samples. And that writing sample ended up, Sam Becker later told me, was the reason I was put on a National Institutes of Health research grant instead of a teaching assistantship when I arrived at the University of Iowa. So the Iowa College of Public Health didn't yet exist. That didn't exist until 1999. So 90 to 93, I was working in public health. It was a partnership between the School of Preventive Medicine, Sociology, and Communication and Media Studies. Sam Becker was one of my professors, and the Becker Communication Studies building was where my work took place. And we did a lot of really interesting public health work. And two of the things we did have had impacts ever since. One was we helped develop, the graduate students working on this program with the School of Preventive Medicine and Communication and Sociology, we helped develop a teacher-friendly anti-tobacco curriculum. And my first peer-reviewed publication is actually teacher adoption as an anti-tobacco friendly curriculum. And what we were doing as grad students, we were very clear in those meetings that the DARE, the drug abuse resistance education that was being done in schools, was really just trying to scare the students into not using tobacco, and also to tell on one another and to listen to the authorities and not do it because it was illegal and they weren't 18. And what we were saying at the time is, young people, they're going to be influenced by the same thing the deodorant and other commercials are. You don't want to smell bad. You don't want chewing tobacco was done by most of the skateboarders. They were called corn chippers. And so it was smoking tobacco and chewing tobacco. And so we developed a curriculum that the teachers at these 3 towns in Iowa could then use to show that your breath smells bad. If you're smoking, your fingers turn yellow. Also, if you're smoking, it negatively affects your skin. So these are all things that are now used really widely to influence young people to not smoke and now vape because it's going to make not because you're going to die. I mean, you're going to die is a big one for young kids to take in. And you're going to die 20 years earlier. That's very abstract when you're 13, 14, or 15. But you are going to have bad looking skin right now because the blood flow stops the minute you smoke the cigarette. So that we developed. And then the next thing we developed was a discussion or that I became educated in was the toxic acceleration of disease states. That asbestos and cigarette smoking led to mesothelioma and cancers much faster, 20 years less latency period than one or the other alone. And so I got really deep into the medical side of the literature in accelerators and synergistic exposures. So that's how I ended up with that background. In 1995, I took a full-time job in Baltimore. I finished my dissertation in 97. And while I was there at Goucher College in Baltimore, I was there from 95 to 2004. I became sick myself. There was a leaky appliance in my home, and I started to become very ill. And the carbon monoxide awareness campaign, I identified these symptoms that you see to the right on carbon monoxide exposures. And then a researcher at Hopkins, he was looking at where Poe lived, Edgar Allan Poe, when he was writing The Telltale Heart, The Fall of the House of Usher, and a couple other ones. And I separately identified symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning in Poe's work. And so that was very interesting and cool. And also it resulted in publications and also transformation, and carbon monoxide is now listed as one of the things that Poe might have been exposed to. And I also started working on multiple chemical sensitivity. And I was seeing doctors for my own health at UCLA, Hopkins, Hershey, Penn State Medical Center, and improving and getting better myself. But I was also working on a public carbon monoxide awareness campaign with other scholars. So that led into my work on Gulf War syndrome, 90 to 91 Gulf War. One of the things that we researchers getting together had to help prove was they were very sick. First it was 50,000, then it was 200,000, then it was like 600,000 soldiers who had been in the Persian Gulf War 90-91, and they had developed lots of illnesses, and multiple chemical sensitivities were one of them. So we worked together, lots of us scholars, to shift the frame to help the sick veterans from the first Gulf War get the answers, benefits, and treatments that they deserved. And I worked with different people. The film finally came out in February of 2001, and so we put out the media releases as A Decade of Denial. 10 years after the end of the ground war. All of these soldiers are sick, and worked with Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison of Texas, Ross Perot. His wife had gone to Goucher College. So, and then we distributed the film. What we did is we would have conferences, we would have press releases. Oh, sorry. Am I running?
Yeah, you're all good, Donna. Keep going. You're at just past 10 minutes.
Just past 10 minutes. Okay, perfect. Based upon all of that work, on the Gulf War syndrome. As September 11 hits, all of us are in communication with each other, public health experts, MDs, nurses, PhDs, and we're in communication with each other. And as the towers came down, of course, we were shocked like everybody else. And then we kept waiting for them to evacuate Lower Manhattan. You know, the hazmat crews went to the Pentagon with their full hazmat suits, and it never happened. And Christy Todd Whitman she was the head of the EPA at the time. She got a memo from George Bush, baby George, not Papa George. Bush was the president at the time. And the memo was, your job is to keep Lower Manhattan running. And that's how after that, the illnesses just spread to the rescue, recovery, and cleanup workers, the residents, the business workers, and the school children at Stuyvesant and other high schools. In February of 2004, I decided that I wanted to move to the Northeast. In 2004, raise my family more in the Northeast, and also work with the sick of 9/11 and those helping them to get the answers, benefits, and treatments that they deserve. So February 2004, had the job interview in New York, bought my husband a Red Sox hat, took the train back to Baltimore in February 2004, and I said, I think I got the job. We're moving to New York, and we're going to break the curse of the babe. So that was the year that we broke the curse of the babe. I used to joke about that in class, but students in New York were very angry. But more importantly, what happened is I arrived at SUNY New Paltz in 2004, and I gave up tenure at Goucher, had to re-earn tenure at SUNY New Paltz, which I did in 2006. I was hired an associate rank. And I applied for a public grant from Provost LaValle, $10,000. And I got that grant. And so I only ended up spending $7,000 of it because $3,000 was going to be a
I have no
certain.
idea what they're talking about.
And
You wanna hear?
so the partially funded this film, The Toxic Aftermath of 9/11. I attended a conference at SUNY Stony Brook, helped get people to be interviewed in the film, and then had conferences. 2006, SUNY New Paltz. We start to shift the frame from cough to cancer, from toxins to the toxic aftermath of 9/11. We speak in that language to every journalist, and it totally influences the way that it's talked about. And also, you couldn't get, got, great coverage. Back then, the Village Voice was still around. We got a 6,500 word cover spread, Eye Cancer New York, the growing connection between 9/11 and cancer. We did a lot of different actions that I don't have time to go into. John Field was at that first conference at SUNY New Paltz. He's a name that you probably know, working with Jon Stewart to get the 9/11 Health and Compensation Act passed. Sue Edelman at the New York Post, she was always covering these stories. James Zadroga was the first man who the coroner determined died from 9/11. He was also slandered in the papers and things before everything went the way it should have. Don't have time to go into those details. Oh, but we could get international coverage. You see, like the French Elle covered Bonnie Gibbreed, but we couldn't get coverage in the US. Like, it was very hard to get US media to concentrate on the toxic aftermath of 9/11. They were fixated on their own agendas. Go forward to spring, March 25th, 2023. I'm presenting the open house at SUNY New Paltz Accepted Applicants Day, and I'm explaining strategic communication to an 18-year-old. And this picture of me that I put there, it's so strange. I kept setting alarms. I told my family, I'm like, I have an open house this Saturday. Don't let me forget. It was really weird. Anyway, I took that picture before I left and titled it Determined. I don't know what I was determined to do. Anyway, I show up and I'm explaining to this 18-year-old, and his mom puts her hand on him and she just starts to cry. And she said, "Oh my God, it's you." And she said, my husband's here. He was an NYPD officer. And he's still with us, thankfully. And so that was an incredible moment. As the students cleared away, then I spoke to the dad. He and I had an amazing moment. Turns out we were in a lot of news stories together. We had never met each other. He was thanking me for making the cancer connection public because nobody would make it public at the time. I was thanking him for his service on 9/11 and his illnesses since. We were thanking each other. Neither would accept the apology. But it was really amazing. It was this moment where he and I stood there in the same building, right outside the room where the conference was held in 2006. And we reflected on all of the different elements that it took to get the Congress and then the Senate to pass the 9/11 Health and Compensation Act, and then also the lawsuit that I don't have time to go into. But just in case you think I'm full of beans here, this is part of an A&E documentary. Usually I was in the background, but in this one, this was an A&E documentary on the 2007 anniversary, and she insisted that I be in the film because nobody would explain the cancer
links
connection.
between 9/11 and specific cases like John Walcott's leukemia or Gary Acker's multiple myeloma. And that's in large part because the doctors have never seen a group of people get so sick so fast.
If you're exposed to only benzene,
That's me,
benzene causes
and that's
leukemia.
communication
You're
studies.
going to usually get cancer 20 to 30 years later. There's going to be a latency period.
But the old rules of latency may not apply to 9/11, where a number of toxins were working together in concert, a condition known as toxic synergy.
What toxic synergy science tells us that when you add the toxins together, when you have the benzene plus the asbestos plus the lead, that you have what's called the acceleration of disease states. It's a toxic synergistic speeding up of the disease process. So the latency period is shortened. So instead of seeing leukemia or blood cancers or any types of cancer actually in 20 to 30 years, you're going to see them in, the mice studies said, 3 to 5 years. And that's exactly what we're seeing.
So that pretty much wraps up my presentation. I just wanted to, I didn't really talk about the pun, but the oops, it's classic showing a video. And so that wraps up my presentation, and I don't know how to unshare my screen, but I thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, thanks very much, Donna. Thanks for that. Okay, so we're running slightly over, but moving on to our final presentation of this section. We've got Laura Trujillo Liñán, who you will recognize from earlier, and Ricardo Meneses-Trujillo, both from the Universidad Panamericana in Mexico. And their presentation is on human rights and technology, an approach to analysing the impacts of media on society. So over to you two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dom. Well, this paper was done in co-authorship with Ricardo Meneses. He was a mastermind for this paper. So, in a world intricately woven with digital threads, the fabric of human rights is being stretched and tested in unprecedented ways. The rapid advancement of technology, while opening doors for innovation and connection, also brings with it a web of ethical dilemmas and social challenges. In this context, the underlying question is, how can we harness the power of technology to enhance rather than undermine the fundamental rights that anchor us to our humanity? For the foundational reflections of Marshall McLuhan to the modern philosophies that guide our interactions with the digital sphere, this work seeks to show the importance of defending human rights in the era of technology. We stand at the crossroads of an era where algorithmic profiling shapes our preferences and conglomerates softly sculpt our societal norms. Yet, in the shadows of this digital dominion, the innate human thirst for freedom, privacy, and self-determination endures. So, in the first place, we'll talk about human rights. From birth, human beings possess certain qualities, skills, rights, and obligations that are part of their nature, which lead them to engage with the world, have experiences, and thus create their identity. Human rights are such an important quality for human beings that to deny them would be counterproductive to their life and to the society in which they live. According to Amnesty International, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations on December 10, 1948. Its adoption recognized that human rights are the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace. The rights included continue to be the basis of international human rights law. Moreover, these rights have certain qualities that are worth highlighting. So, in the first place, human rights are rights we have simply because we exist as human beings. They are not granted by any state. Also, these universal rights are inherent to us all, regardless of nationality, sex, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status. They range from the most fundamental, the right to life, to those that make life worth living, such as the rights to food, education, work, health, and liberty. In this regard, it is interesting to note the inherent nature of human rights. They cannot be lost or detached from the person because they are part of their being. In philosophical terms, we may say that they are part of our essence or the formal cause of the person. No government or individual can prevent the possession of these rights. They are not granted, but are possessed by nature. Furthermore, human rights are indivisible and interdependent, meaning that violating one right can affect the enjoyment of others. Finally, another fundamental characteristic of human rights is equality. Every individual is entitled to the same rights without any discrimination. This characteristic is crucial in ensuring fairness and justice in applying and protecting human rights. In addition to these characteristics, the United Nations has compiled 30 different articles highlighting the manner and the place where human rights should be primarily protected. Among them, and for the purpose of this work, we have chosen human rights and their relationship with education, technology, and freedom, as we consider these to be very important due to the implications they have on the individual and the areas in which they interact. But how is technology related to human rights? From the beginning of time, humans have had to learn to navigate the world in order to survive. And for this, they have developed tools to adapt to their environment. Marshall McLuhan, a communication theorist of the 1960s, considered these tools as extensions through which humans interact with the world, from the stones used to build their homes or hunt to the language that helped them communicate with others. In this sense, if everything that humans use to function in the world is a medium, then practically everything around a person is a medium. And for McLuhan, every medium is in turn technology. In this way, technology is more than computers, cars, or gadgets. It is the entirety of human-made artifacts that extend and amplify our grasp of the world. Moreover, if everything that surrounds us is a medium that we also use to navigate daily life, it is inevitable to think about how these influence humans. A medium is not only a tool or technology, but the medium is also the message. Through its use, humans modify the way they do things, not only in daily practice, but also in the way they think. An example that may show the degree of impact of current technology on humans is the case of Brian Johnson, whose motto is "Don't Die." Johnson's idea is that technology is so advanced today that it is possible to cure any disease. And if we change our perspective and consider death not as the end of human life, but as a disease for which we have not yet found a cure, then the perspective of death changes significantly. Johnson has dedicated at least the last 2 years to extending his life, spending several millions of his fortune, taking 60 pills a day, monitoring his sleep, not going out to parties, eating a few kilos of vegetables a day, and having 30 doctors constantly monitor him, among other things. The result, which he openly shows on his personal site, is that although he was 44 years old in 2021, his actual biological age due to his treatment is 38 years old. It is in this way that technology can seriously affect the way we act and think. Nowadays, just as we adapt to them to carry out our activities, new technologies such as cell phones, computers, applications, among many others, also adapt to our behavior, learn from us, and even suggest what to do or not do. It is in this regard that technology begins to permeate the type of decisions we make. We have become so dependent on them that we have transferred the power of decision to them. Thus, for example, instead of deciding which route to take to get home, I check my map application to suggest the best route. If I want to spend leisure time on social networks, they show and suggest what to watch and what to buy. Finally, with ChatGPT, it is possible to ask what to do on a trip, what to eat, what to write, etc. The decision has already been transferred to an entity external to the human being. So, as we can see, let me close this because I cannot follow the presentation.
You're on about 9 minutes, Laura. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So as we can see, the advancement and personalization of technology have led companies, associations, governments, among many other areas, to seek to influence people through the media they use daily. In this graphic, we can see the time spent online daily. As we can see, the highest average is 6 hours, which was reached in 2021. And in this other graphic, we can see the main reasons for using internet. Concerns have arisen regarding the design of contemporary technologies, particularly those based on algorithmic profiling, which adapt to a user's preferences, mood, friends, favorite places, and more. Consequently, technology relies on user interaction to continuously refine its suggestions, potentially persuading or even manipulating individuals into certain actions or ways of thinking. So, allowing ourselves to be constantly monitored to better profile our tastes and for large conglomerates to sell more or better is not justified, as this practice goes against fundamental human rights such as freedom and privacy. Through these technologies, we are being taught what to believe, what to think, how to act. We are giving a map of reality that suits large companies. In this technological society, this algorithmic profiling, beyond achieving well-being for people, has led us to excess and loneliness, thereby causing a lack of happiness. Studies reflect that the more time spent on our smartphones, the greater the unhappiness in individuals. In addition to this, the more the internet is used, other problems are generated that significantly affect people's life and health. What should we do if the media are destroying us? Wouldn't it be better to stop creating new technologies, new smart devices? The answer is difficult and simple at the same time. The ideal is not to lose sight of human being and not to create just for the sake of creating, but to go beyond the medium itself, to give it a transcendent purpose that leads the individual and society to the common good. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Laura. And thank you, Ricardo, as well, for your contributions there. Brilliant. Okay, so we've got some time for questions. So if anybody has any questions to any of the previous speakers, now would be the time. You can either raise your hand. Charles?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank Laura for her excellent presentation. I just wanted to add something. My company investigated with the help of 3 teams of graduate students from Seattle University online information about health. And what they discovered is that globally, over 90% of the information available is either inaccurate, obsolete, or misleading. It's a very small percent of information online that is vetted. The issue that they have just reported on is actually, in terms of technology and human rights, even the right to accurate information, it's an immense issue with huge implications for public health, among other things. So I just wanted to reinforce the work that you're doing, and I hope that you guys in Mexico City keep doing more work in this area, and I look forward to reading what you've done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. And if you can share with me that results, it will be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Any other questions, comments, or any other speakers? Elsa?
Yes, thank you. Laura, felicidades. Me encantó tu presentación. I just said that it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsa. Thank you.
I'm sorry to be back again, but I just want to quickly let everybody know that Mr. Ball, his presentation, I want to work with him to develop it even further because he's on to some very powerful stuff, which I can verify. And so thank you.
Very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, anyone else? Well, thanks very much, everybody. So it's bang on 1:45. So I think if there's no other comments for any of our speakers or any final comments from any of our speakers. Oh, Heiner, just in the nick of time.
I think this is an extraordinary session, and I just want to refer to Ball because according to Peirce, there is symbol, icon, and index. And the discussion of what the index is in any kind of real, virtual, augmented space is a pointer to possibilities. So if you really want to go with me into bringing terminological spaces, index spaces, and real geographic spaces together, I really just felt I have to jump in. Thank you for the session. I really enjoy.
Thank you, Heiner. And we can just squeeze in one more. Eleni?
Hello. It was very interesting, the whole discussion. I would like to ask Laura, how does she think that convenience is connected with the use of digital gadgets and computers and everything? I think we have deified convenience. And how is this connected with the moral issues? That because it can be everything convenient, isn't it? So that's my question. How is convenience is connected with your thoughts and with the moral issues that comes from the use of all these digital devices and all this stuff? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleni. I don't know if Ricardo, do you want to answer that question about the? It's because we showed a very interesting graphic about the time the people spend in technology, in the internet, and it's impressive because the graphic says that when we stay more time in technology, then we are more unhappy. Ricardo, do you want to say something about it?
Yes, it's interesting because smartphones, well, there's an excellent TV series called Social Dilemma. And then it is interesting that there people in the technology industry say that companies are building their apps to so that people can be there a lot of time. So because we have this technology attached to us always by having notifications from the apps, instead of being like more free, right? You are like being like a slave of these apps. So I think it's interesting that you are becoming a slave of the iPhone, right, or the phone. So I think although technology can be used because it's very convenient to do a lot of good things, it can also be well, yeah, like
enslaving.
Slaving. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Great point, Ricardo. Thank you. And final comment to Lance.
Yeah, well, I want to thank everyone for their presentations. And Jana, it was good to get your comments on listening. And so I just want to note that the study of listening and research on it has been incorporated into general semantics by one of our trustees, Mary Lehman, and you can find in her book, where I think it's Awareness in Action, that she's got a chapter on listening in that book, and Mary teaches. Has been teaching an online course on general semantics. She's done that for us a couple of times, and will continue to do that. And she's going to be part of the one of the instructors when we head out to London to do an in-person course in July. So I think there's a lot of room for connection, because listening is the key to evaluation, which is what general semantics is all about.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's a great point. Connectional consulted. And yeah, I know I did something really different with the presentation. I wanted to have manifest some actual, some actual data about our communal listening. And again, that link is in the chat if you'd like to check it out. I think it's really, really poignant. And thank you, Lance.
Wonderful. Well, thanks to all our speakers. I make it 10:02, so reconvene in 10 minutes for the next session, Art of Awareness, which is going to be chaired by Tom Gencarelli. Okay. Well, thanks to the speakers, and thanks everyone.